On March 9th, 1997, the Notorious B.I.G. left a packed music industry party in Los Angeles. At only 24 years old, Biggie was already one of the biggest rappers in the music industry. His second studio album was just 2 weeks away, and from the outside, his career appeared to be entering an entirely new level. But as Biggie and his entourage pulled away from the party, their vehicles became separated in traffic. Biggie was sitting in the front passenger seat of a Suburban when his driver stopped at a red light. Moments later, a dark Chevrolet Impala pulled up alongside them, and someone inside that vehicle opened fire directly into Biggie's side of the vehicle. The Impala disappeared into the streets of Los Angeles, and Biggie was rushed to a nearby hospital. Doctors were unable to save him. One of the biggest artists in hip-hop had just been murdered in public, with security, witnesses, and members of his own entourage nearby. And yet, nearly 3 decades later, nobody has ever been charged with pulling the trigger. But that does not mean investigators have no idea who may have killed him. Over the years, corrupt police officers, gang members, a powerful record label figure, and multiple alleged shooters have all been linked through investigations, lawsuits, or competing theories to Biggie's murder. Different detectives have even claimed that they solved the case, only to arrive at completely different answers. So how exactly did the Notorious B.I.G. end up stopping at a red light just to get gunned down? Who was inside the car that pulled up beside him? And how did one of the most infamous murders in music history remain unsolved for this long? Before he became the Notorious B.I.G., he was Christopher Wallace, a kid from Brooklyn being raised primarily by his mother, Valletta. His father left when he was young, and Valletta worked hard to provide him with structure and keep him in school. Christopher was intelligent, naturally funny, and gifted with words. But as a teenager, he also became involved in the streets, selling drugs, and eventually had several encounters with the law. At the same time, he was building a reputation around Brooklyn for his deep voice, sharp delivery, and ability to turn everyday street life into vivid stories. That talent eventually reached Sean Puff Daddy Diddy Combs, and within only a few years, Christopher Wallace went from being known around his neighborhood to becoming one of the biggest rappers in the music industry. His debut album, Ready to Die, was released in 1994 and made him the face of New York hip-hop, establishing him as one of the most vivid storytellers in rap. But his rise happened during one of the most volatile periods in rap history, and as his career grew, so did a conflict that would eventually follow him all the way to Los Angeles. Before the feud, Biggie and Tupac had once been friends, but that relationship changed after Tupac was shot and robbed at Quad Recording Studios in New York in 1994. Biggie and members of the Bad Boy Camp were in the building that night, but they denied having anything to do with the attack. Tupac eventually came to believe that they knew more than they admitted, and the tension between them became public. After Tupac signed with Death Row Records, the conflict grew beyond the two rappers. It became connected to rival labels, regional pride, and the larger East Coast-West Coast feud. Tupac openly targeted Biggie in music and interviews, while Biggie continued to deny involvement in the shooting. Then, in September 1996, Tupac was killed in a drive-by shooting in Las Vegas. There was no evidence establishing that Biggie was involved in Tupac's murder, but only 6 months later, Biggie would also be killed in a drive-by shooting, this time in Los Angeles. In March 1997, Biggie traveled to Los Angeles to promote his upcoming second album, Life After Death. He was still recovering from a serious accident that had left him walking with a cane. Biggie later said that the crash had forced him to slow down and think more carefully about what he wanted to do with the rest of his life. In that same interview, he admitted that fame could not protect him from everything, saying, "There's nothing that protects you from the inevitable." But even while recovering and with the East Coast and West Coast tension still surrounding Biggie, his attention remained on the album and public appearances connected to its release. Life After Death was scheduled to arrive later that month, and Biggie continued making appearances in a city where many people still viewed him as the face of the opposing side. On March 7th, 1997, he attended the Soul Train Music Awards at the Shrine Auditorium. Biggie appeared on stage to present an award. Parts of the Los Angeles crowd booed him.
What's up, Cali?
The reaction showed just how much hostility from the feud still surrounded him, but Biggie remained in the city. The following night, he attended a major music industry party hosted by Vibe magazine and Quest Records at the Peterson Automotive Museum. The building was packed with artists, executives, and other celebrities who had come to Los Angeles for the awards weekend. More than 1,000 people were reportedly inside, and despite still recovering from an accident, Biggie appeared relaxed and in a good mood as he moved through the party. From the outside, it looked like another major night in Biggie's career. His new album was only weeks away, he was surrounded by members of his team, and had security traveling with him. But shortly after midnight, authorities began shutting the party down after the venue became overcrowded. Hundreds of people began leaving at the same time. Biggie and his entourage made their way outside and entered a small convoy of SUVs. Diddy traveled in one Suburban, while Biggie rode in the front passenger seat of another, a Chevrolet Suburban, driven by Gregory G. Money Young. Damian D. Rock Butler and Lil Cease were seated behind them. A Chevrolet Blazer, carrying members of Bad Boy Security, followed the two Suburbans as they moved through the traffic outside the museum. But with hundreds of people leaving the area at the same time, the vehicles became separated in traffic. Diddy's vehicle eventually made it through an intersection, while Biggie's Suburban was forced to stop at a red light near Wilshire Boulevard and Fairfax Avenue. As the vehicle waited, a dark Chevrolet Impala pulled up beside the passenger side. The driver opened fire into the Suburban before immediately speeding away. A security guard working across the street later recalled hearing what sounded like 5 or 6 shots. Biggie was struck 4 times. The burst of gunfire sent people outside the museum running in panic. One witness described the area around the SUV as immediate bedlam, with doors flying open and people rushing toward the vehicle. However, inside the SUV that Biggie was in, it quickly became clear that Biggie had been seriously wounded. According to his autopsy report, 3 of the bullets that struck him were not considered fatal. One traveled through his left arm, another entered through his back and exited through his left shoulder without striking any vital organs, and a third traveled through his left thigh, but the 4th bullet entered through his right hip and traveled upward through his body, damaging several vital organs, including his colon, liver, heart, and left lung. Biggie's entourage rushed him directly to Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, where doctors performed emergency surgery. His bullet-riddled Suburban remained outside the hospital while friends and fans gathered in the parking lot. But at approximately 1:15 a.m. that morning, Christopher Wallace was pronounced dead. He was 24 years old. The attack happened on a crowded Los Angeles street only minutes after Biggie left a packed celebrity party. The shooter had pulled directly beside his vehicle, fired into the seat where he was sitting, and disappeared before anyone could stop him. But despite the number of people nearby, the security surrounding Biggie, and the public nature of the attack, police were left without a clear suspect. And almost immediately, there are a lot of questions here. In the hours after Biggie's death, Los Angeles police began searching for the dark sedan and the person behind the wheel. On paper, it looked like a murder that should have produced answers quickly. The party had been packed, hundreds of people were leaving the area, and members of Biggie's entourage had only been feet away. But investigators were still left with very few useful eyewitnesses and even fewer solid leads. The area outside the museum had descended into confusion as guests scattered, vehicles crowded the surrounding streets, and the shooter escaped almost immediately. Investigators searched for evidence that might identify the vehicle or the gunman, but no publicly known recording clearly captured the killer. Several weeks later, police released a composite sketch based on witness accounts. The suspected gunman was described as a young black man driving a dark late model sedan, with witnesses also saying he had been wearing a bow tie. LAP Lieutenant Ross Moan described the murder as a targeted hit and said investigators suspected the gunman may have conspired with other people before carrying it out. But the description remained broad. The vehicle was never conclusively traced to the killer, and the early investigation produced no arrest. As the investigation continued, detectives began looking for evidence that the shooting had been arranged by people beyond the gunman himself. One of the key detectives assigned to Biggie's murder investigation was Russell Poole, an experienced homicide investigator with the LAPD. During that same time, Poole was also investigating corruption inside his own department. During that work, he came across the name David Mack. David Mack was a former LAPD officer who had been arrested for helping carry out a major bank robbery that netted more than $700,000. The robbery immediately made Mack stand out, as this was not a minor case of a police misconduct. It showed that a sworn officer had been involved in a carefully planned high-level crime. However, the robbery was only the tip of the iceberg. As Poole looked deeper into David Mack, he began finding connections that pulled the former officer closer to Biggie's murder investigation. So Mack had documented ties to members of the Paru Bloods, the same broader gang circle connected to Death Row Records. Investigators also learned that Mack owned a black Chevrolet Impala, similar to the type of car witnesses described leaving Biggie's murder scene. That did not prove it was the same vehicle. But to Russell Poole, it was another connection that was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. David Mack was also friends with a man named Amir Muhammad, who had previously gone by the name Harry Billups. Russell Poole eventually came to believe that Amir Muhammad may have been the man who pulled alongside Biggie's SUV and opened fire. From there, Russell Poole developed a much larger theory. He believed Suge Knight wanted revenge for Tupac's death and used people connected to the Piru Bloods to arrange the murder. Under Russell Poole's version of events, Mack helped organize the attack, while Amir Muhammad served as the shooter. David Mack, Amir Muhammad, and Suge Knight all denied having anything to do with Biggie's murder, and none of them were ever charged in connection with the case. But Russell Poole believed he was uncovering more than a plot involving one corrupt officer. He began to suspect that people inside the LAPD were stopping him from following the evidence wherever it led. But one of the most important claims surrounding Russell Poole's theory eventually began to fall apart. A paid informant had helped investigators connect Amir Muhammad to the murder and had selected him from a photograph. Years later, while being questioned under oath, the informant stated that he had never actually known what Amir Muhammad looked like and had essentially guessed when he was making the identification. He also stated that much of what he said about the alleged conspiracy was based on hearsay rather than anything he had personally witnessed. This informant also further revealed that he had been diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia and had received treatment for much of his life. But the most damaging admissions were that the identification had not been reliable and that his broader claims were based largely on information that came from other people. And that seriously weakened one of the central claims used to identify Amir Muhammad as Biggie's alleged shooter. In January 2005, the FBI closed its investigation without bringing charges against David Mack, Amir Muhammad, or anyone else connected to Russell Poole's theory. But that did not erase every question Russell Poole had. David Mack remained a convicted bank robber with documented gang associations, and he owned a black Chevrolet Impala, similar to the type of vehicle described in Biggie's murder. Those connections were suspicious, but suspicion was not enough to prove that Mack, or Amir Muhammad, had participated in the murder. Now, at the same time, Biggie's family was pursuing a wrongful death lawsuit against the city of Los Angeles. The lawsuit had alleged that corrupt police officers may have been connected to Biggie's murder and that the department had failed to properly investigate those connections. The case finally reached trial in 2005, but during the proceedings, the family's attorney learned that the LAPD had failed to turn over documents connected to the murder investigation. The records had been found inside the desk and filing cabinet of LAPD Detective Stephen Katz, who had worked on matters connected to the case. The judge concluded that the documents should have been disclosed before the trial and declared a mistrial. The discovery did not prove that the LAPD officers had arranged Biggie's murder, but it did show that relevant investigative material had been withheld from the family's legal team, and that gave Biggie's family and the public another reason to question whether the case had been handled in the right way. With the city still facing the family's allegations, the LAPD created another task force in 2006 to re-examine the murder and determine whether those claims could be proven. Now, one of the detectives assigned to the task force was Greg Kading. By then, the case file had grown into an enormous collection of reports, witness statements, and competing theories. His job was to review that material and determine whether any of it could still lead to charges. But the new investigation did not point toward David Mack or Amir Muhammad. Instead, it led to a completely different theory. Suge Knight had arranged Biggie's murder as revenge for Tupac's death, and another man had pulled the trigger. Now, because Suge Knight was incarcerated when Biggie was killed, he would have needed someone outside the jail to help organize the attack. Investigators eventually interviewed a woman who was publicly referred to by the pseudonym Teresa Swan. She was described as a former girlfriend of Suge Knight and the mother of one of his children. According to the investigation, she admitted that Suge Knight had asked her to help arrange Biggie's murder through people outside the jail, and the man believed to have been hired for the shooting was Wardell Poochie Fouse, a Piru Blood member connected to Suge Knight and Death Row Records. Now, according to Greg Kading, Wardell Fouse had allegedly been paid $13,000 to carry out this murder. Under this theory, Wardell Fouse was the man who pulled up beside Biggie's Suburban, opened fire at this red light, and killed him. But by the time the task force identified him as the alleged shooter, Wardell Poochie Fouse was already dead. In 2003, he had been shot 10 times in the back while riding his motorcycle through Compton. Investigators could no longer question him, arrest him, or test the accusation against him in court. Investigators then tried to obtain an admission directly from Suge Knight himself. Teresa Swan, Suge's ex, later visited Suge Knight in prison while secretly wearing a recording device. But during the conversation, Suge Knight said nothing that directly implicated him in Biggie's murder. Suge Knight has denied ordering Biggie's killing, and neither Suge Knight or Wardell Fouse was ever charged. That left the case with two major investigations offering two completely different answers. Russell Poole believed David Mack helped organize the murder and Amir Muhammad fire the shots. Greg Kading believed Suge Knight used a middleman to hire Wardell Fouse. They disagreed about the shooter, the organizer, and whether corrupt police officers had participated. Both detectives believed they had reached the truth, but neither theory produced enough reliable evidence to charge anyone. There was no publicly identified murder weapon, no conclusive physical evidence placing any of the alleged shooters inside the Impala, and no witness account strong enough to settle the case. Years of conflicting statements, unreliable informants, dead suspects, and mishandled evidence that had left investigators with several possible explanations, but no single version that they could use to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that their version of events was the truth. Biggie's murder had produced no shortage of answers. What the case never produced was one answer strong enough to take it into court.
This is Biggie's blood. That's why we're here. We're here because of Biggie, and we want to show him respect.
16 days after Biggie was killed, Life After Death was released. The album became one of the biggest records of his career, but Biggie never lived to see its success. He had traveled to Los Angeles to promote the next chapter of his life, only for a red light to become the final stop of his story. Over the years, investigators have identified different shooters, different organizers, and different motives. Some theories may sound more convincing than others, but belief is not proof and theory is not justice. Nearly 3 decades later, the Notorious B.I.G., real name Christopher Wallace, murder remains officially unsolved. The murder weapon was never publicly identified, and the car was never conclusively traced to the killer. The person who pulled up beside Biggie's Suburban and opened fire has never faced a jury. And while the Notorious B.I.G. became one of the most influential artists in hip-hop history, the question surrounding his final moments remains the same. Who really killed Biggie? It's really crazy how nobody ever got charged for this crime. But then again, this happened in the 90s when people got away with stuff like this. I'm curious to hear what you guys have to say about this story. If you made it this far, drop a like on this video and subscribe if you're new here. My name is Blackie Speaks. Nice to meet you. Catch you guys in the next video. Peace. I'm out.